Okay, good morning, and thank you for joining everyone. Greg Samuels with CBTS, Senior Director in our Communications Practice, a 20-year veteran of CBTS, so that makes me uniquely qualified to be the moderator of this panel today. We appreciate you joining. Just some housekeeping items. All attendees will be muted upon entry, and video is turned off to avoid connection quality issues. We tried to have this event early in the morning. I apologize to those that may be on the West Coast. So from Atlantic, Canada, where it's 10:30 to the West Coast where it's 6 a.m., hopefully we're going to avoid network congestion and have a high quality event. We are going to leverage the chat panel for any Q&A throughout the presentation. So in this event center, there's both chat and Q&A. We can monitor both, but we'd prefer for you to put your questions in the chat, direct it to all the panelists, and we will answer those questions at the end of the presentation. If you do not see the chat panel, click on the chat icon at the bottom of the main WebEx screen over on the right-hand side. First, we just wanted to talk about our meeting goals, right? We want to give you a glimpse of how we are internally supporting work from home efforts, the tools we leverage on a daily basis, and what a typical and a power user might look like in our environment. Most importantly, we want to answer any questions you may have. So please ask as many questions as you like, leveraging that chat functionality. If we can't answer them today, we will be sure to follow up with you and get your question answered. This event is being recorded, so if you have to drop for any reason, this will be available in 2 to 3 days so you can come back and review the recording. I'd first like to start off with introducing our presenters. We have Steve Harris from OnX. Steve?
Hi, everyone. Steve Harris. I've been with OnX for almost 10 years now, 9.5. And I've been in the industry for about 28 years, working in Canada, the US, and a little bit in Europe as well. And I focus on our professional services teams here in Canada, and been working a lot to help people with dealing with setting up and working from home.
Thank you, Steve. John Lloyd?
Thanks, Greg. John Lloyd. I have responsibility for our cloud networking practice at CBTS. I've been with the company going on 8 years now, and can tell you I haven't really been through anything like we're experiencing over the last 3 weeks. So a lot of kind of preparation and lessons learned over 8 years now being applied, and hope to be able to deliver some of that on the call today.
Thanks, John. David Absalom.
Thanks, Greg. Good morning, everyone. I'm David Absalom. I'm director of our hosted enterprise voice solution. I've been with CBTS since 2012, but working with telecommunications and large enterprise systems for quite a long time. I echo John in that these are some unprecedented times, and we're seeing some very solid solutions being put together to meet the need.
Thanks, Dave. Chris Pope.
Thank you, Greg. Chris Pope. I joined CBTS back in 2009. Prior to that, worked with Cincinnati Bell closely in various roles, but do run the voice core engineering team here at CBTS. So we've seen everything over the last few weeks from folks shifting to the work from home environment, and we'll jump more into that in just a little bit. But glad to be here and appreciate everyone's time this morning.
Thanks, Chris. And behind the scenes, we have Tony King from our organization as well, a colleague. He is monitoring that chat panel and will moderate our Q&A session at the end. So we first wanted to give you a glimpse of how CBTS and OnX are addressing our work from home initiatives. So the governor of Ohio was one of the first state or provincial leaders to issue a work from home order for non-essential users. So we instituted a company-wide order for all employees and contractors that were non-essential to their business, the day-to-day business, to work from home across the globe. This included our resources located in the US, Canada, India, and the UK. So one of the first things we had to do was we had to ensure proper VPN and internet bandwidth capacity to leverage all those users that would need to get to the intranet and internal resources of our corporate network. Recent upgrades in the past few years have helped. We implemented new security appliances with AnyConnect VPN, and we have further plans to expand that environment. Collaboration tools already existed to allow work from home communication. So on a daily basis, we're leveraging tools such as WebEx, WebEx Teams, UC1. And those tools are being used for both cloud meetings, for messaging in the cloud, for soft phone capabilities like UC1. So we've been using the work from home tools in our daily business before the work from home order came down from the state of Ohio. SaaS applications like Office 365 and Salesforce have allowed users to leverage those internet applications without having to log on to the VPN. So even though we ensured that we had proper VPN connectivity, I don't, as a user, log on to the VPN unless I have to get to corporate intranet applications, such as our HR platform or our corporate learning platform. That's the only time that I have to log on to a VPN and tie up that critical resource. Another thing we've done is we've repositioned resources to both call center operations and network operation groups that have unique needs and are major customer touch points. So in the environment of work from home, if we had a professional service resource that was used to or on a daily basis going out and touching our customers' applications in their environment, we can shift those resources that are idle to things such as capacity planning or MapD work for our hosted solutions. If the panel would like to add anything to work from home or how we're addressing it, feel free. I guess we're good there. So I'd like to move on now to articulate our learnings and the use cases we've selected. These 3 leaders from our organization who are responsible for products and services that support our customers' work from home initiatives. We'll start with Chris Pope, Director of Solution Design. Chris, please share with our audience what's working well, what we've learned, and maybe what issues we've been able to solve for our customers over the last several weeks. Chris?
Sure thing, Greg. Again, thanks. I want to start with some things that's working well. How are our customers adapting to work from home? How are companies in general adapting to work from home? And it really starts with enabling some of the existing technology that's already out there. Almost everyone has a mobile phone that has the ability to make and receive phone calls, obviously, and how the systems integrate with those in the event a customer is in a state to where they can't be in the office, if they have a legacy PBX, if they're really not positioned to move their workforce. So, what we found is for some companies, it really wasn't until recently that they discovered the full potential of hosting their voice in the cloud. Coupling that with a soft client or a mobile phone, like I just stated, we've seen more than probably 800 businesses that have the ability to quickly shift their workforces to work from home. And that goes back to what Greg was speaking about just a minute ago, utilizing WebEx, WebEx Teams, UC1, all those applications, they've been there, they've been around, they've been kind of waiting for this moment to really shine. And we've been enabling our customers that have frankly been, confused, scared, panicking on what they're going to do. And we've heard almost every use case you can imagine. So what's worked for us is talking to the customers, developing solutions for them, creating cookie cutter designs that we can quickly get the ones that weren't in a place to move and usher them into this new era of working from home. So we've been relying heavily on the soft client capabilities. We've been relying heavily on the meeting tools that we have out there. So, honestly, in my opinion, a lot of these use cases we've seen from some small customers to large customers to thousands of site customers has been ideas thrown left and right. And I feel like it's been our duty to inform the customers of the work from home capabilities that they have as we go through these quickly fast-track planning sessions, so to speak, when they're wanting to move. So that's what's kind of been working for us is being able to quickly adapt and get them using the tools that they didn't know they already had. things that we've learned is that, you know, some of the customers that are out there are still sitting on those legacy PBXs. How do they move quickly? You know, how do they get into this realm of utilizing collab tools, you know, utilizing the workers, and making sure that, you know, even though they're not in the office, they're still working as much as they can. And we really have the tools that we've been able to show that have been there. Again, you know, back to that, you know, from reporting to recording calls to, you know, to using that collab stuff. So there's plenty of things around those. Now, some unique things that we've solved for our customers, and we really kind of pride ourselves. We've seen some larger retail customers reach out to us, restaurant industry, various other ones, where they have to quickly change the messages across the board. You know, thousands of locations to state, hey, we're still open for delivery, we're still open for carryout, we're still doing this, that. You know, here's the new promo for this week. Ways to engage their customer base so that you know, day after day, week after week of staying at home, that they're able to, you know, share that message. And we've been able to make those bulk changes, those mass moves. Just some things that exist out there, and things that, you know, the more we spread the word, the more we make sure that those customers know that we have that ability. Really does kind of set their mind at ease a little bit, that we can get them enabled quicker. Really, that's really about it, Greg. So, you know, if there's any questions around this, feel free to ask them in the chat, of course, and we'll
I have a question. I have a question now, Chris. I'm hoping you can address. So we've had customers that had moved to the hosted platform, and they weren't leveraging the capabilities that they could, just because that wasn't a part of their business. So from this shift to work from home, can you give us some perspective on the volume of requests of folks that were going to a work from home environment and could then leverage things such as soft phone, maybe a volume of what your team has touched over the last several weeks to enable work from home?
Yes, of course. So, you know, just over the last couple of weeks, we've touched over, you know, some of the numbers I threw out earlier, close to 800 businesses we've been able to work from home. Of those, we've touched about 110 to 115, I think it was the last count I checked, and that was just since March the 16th. And those were customers that they had the hosted voice solution. They weren't utilizing the, you know, either the UC1 application or some other functionality to simultaneously ring their mobile phones or whatnot. And, you know, that equates to roughly over 5,000 users throughout those 110 or 15. And it's, you know, it's interesting that these customers are, you know, they're reaching out now to see this. It's kind of pulling them out of the comfort zone of our phones are here, they ring, we take the calls, we move on with our day, and we go. And it says, wow, this is a vital part of our business is the communication side, not just the internet, not just you know, being able to talk to people, but how can we receive these calls if we have to send somebody home? And I think enabling them, you know, for what fits for their business has really worked out, be it a soft client on a mobile phone, a soft client on a desktop, or just merely call forwarding their business out to a, you know, a cell phone. Everything like that is, you know, it all helps out.
Thank you. That's what I was looking for. I knew it was a big number, 5,000, enabling 5,000 cell phones that already had a hosted user, and was an easy lift to make them a work from home user. So thank you, and thank you to your team for everything you're doing for our customers, Chris. Next, I wanted to move on to John Lloyd. I'm sorry, did I skip one here? No. Okay, Dave Absalom. Dave,
yes,
what have you and your team seen? What's working well? What have you learned? And what issues have you solved with your team?
Yes, thanks, Greg. So, you know, we're seeing some unprecedented numbers here. In some of our larger customers, enterprise customers that are government, healthcare, education, unbelievable numbers. As we were sitting here, I got news alerts that 6.6 million Americans have filed unemployment benefits in the last week, and that's 270,000 Ohioans alone. So the call centers, the businesses that are handling these kinds of numbers, these increases, are pushing them to all limits of every piece of their application. What we've seen businesses do is sort of a crawl, walk, run model, meaning when it looked like Governor DeWine and President Trump were going to begin enforcing some regulations, there was a big scramble to get people out of the buildings and get them home. You know, and that was the crawl. It was how do we just simply get them phone calls? And then we moved into a walk where we see, hey, this is going to be going on for a little while. We need to better equip them with what they need to do this. And then we get to that run model where we look and say, this is going to be, you know, a few weeks and maybe even in a few months. So how do we provide a model that's work from home but also has longevity and is sustainable to the business? So in our contact centers specifically, we've seen that play out. We've seen the scramble to get agents to remote locations or work from home, and then we've needed to add functionality to that. You know, from an overall design perspective, there's a couple of layers to that. One is simply getting an agent a phone at their remote office, and that can be sometimes pretty easy depending on how a customer is set up. But then you also need to somehow get them their contact center agent desktop, and that requires a VPN infrastructure or some sort of VDI model. So we've seen those three pieces have to come together for a lot of our enterprise customers that need to send agents home. They need to, one, get them a phone, two, get them some sort of connectivity to the enterprise platform via VPN, and quite often there isn't the ability to send everybody home with a computer. So there's quite often home users, or I'm sorry, folks being sent home as an agent needing to use their own personal device. And that's been breeding a lot of quick turnups of VDI or Citrix or whatever the solution may be. In many of our customers, they already had the infrastructure ready to support that, and then that was just some additional applications. But for others, there were internet gateways that had to be provisioned to allow them to do that. So that was simply just to get some remote agents up and running. Then, because of the massive growth in contact center use, we had to take a look at some other technologies. You know, because the queues and the IVRs were getting hit so hard, we had to find some alternate ways to either get those calls answered or get them redirected. There's a big use of virtual hold or courtesy callback in the Cisco world, which allows a caller who's in a queue to press a key and schedule a callback rather than wait in queue. And the way that typically works is if I'm in queue, it says, you know, your hold time is 30 minutes, or, you know, press 1 to have this call you back when you're closer in the queue. And then I simply hang up, and it calls me back and puts me right back where I was in queue. So that has helped in some areas. The other is because of that massive trunk in our IVR utilization on some of these larger call centers, we're having to sit down with the customer and help them rethink what the IVRs or what the business processes within that call center, you know, how those things are done. And the analogy I'll give is that, you know, if we you know, Walmart's a good one to pick on, right? If you go to Walmart and they only have 3 registers open, making a bigger parking lot for that does not get more customers serviced by those 3 or 4 agents. So the same problem is we can create a bigger trunk or IVR to feed the call center, but if there are not more agents there to service those customers, or if they don't have a more efficient way of servicing those customers, then we're not going to solve any problems. So what we've done quite a bit of is working with our customers to understand the business processes that are being done in those call centers and coming up with ways to make them more efficient. If many of those agents are doing something simple, something like a pin reset, are there ways that we can leverage the IVR to do that without an agent contact? Or are there ways that we can take a look at what the agent is doing and ensure that what is typically a 10-minute call becomes a 2-minute call to make those things more efficient? So a lot of that efficiency, we can look at the infrastructure, and we've had to do that. But a lot of the efficiencies are also, it's forcing us to take a pretty detailed look at the business processes within the call center. And then lastly, one of the things that is pretty popular but has not gotten deployed quite a bit is that omni-channel contact center. So omni-channel meaning leveraging not only a call center with a phone, but leveraging email, chat, and text as ways to broaden the concept or broaden the folks who can provide service to customers in a contact center and give them multiple channels to provide that service. Yes, as we see what's going to happen in the future, I mentioned the crawl, walk, run, and right now I believe we're really beginning to work with our customers on that run. If this is going to be a situation that we're not only in for 2 to 4 weeks, but potentially in for 2 to 3 months, we need to make sure that their agents, their employees can efficiently and effectively service their customer base. So we continue to look at, I mentioned the omni-channel is a way that we're doing that. I've mentioned that we're focusing on the business and the processes that are done by the agents. And lastly, what we're doing is sort of automating that whole process. Again, many of these organizations had to build the infrastructure to support this remote model. Now we want to be able to simplify that. So if they have an opportunity to turn up an additional 200 agents, we're working to create an agent in a box type of mechanism that allows them to quickly turn up new and large chunks of agents to service those customers. And that's, Greg, back to you. That's about what we've got going in the contact center piece.
Thank you, Dave. One question for you as well, and Chris might be able to answer this in conjunction with you. I know you guys work a lot together on capacity planning. What have you had to do from a capacity perspective to make sure our customers aren't getting busy signals from their customers, our customers calling in? Sure. So the team, and I'll give hats off to Chris and his team that manages the trunking very specifically. That team manages that trunking constantly and manually through the day. So we have some very substantial contact centers in our environment that get slammed between 7 a.m. and 7:15 a.m. every single day, as well as between 8 and 8:30. So there is a team that actively monitors that. They've had to monitor the calls per second. The calls per second is quite often set to manage, any type of fraud or denial of service that could be put against the trunking or the call centers. So they've had to hand manage that along with our contact center managers to ensure that we're not sending busy signals out to callers. And as well, we've not only managing the settings that go along with it, but just managing the trunk capacity. In a couple of our call centers that were set for, say, 3,000 concurrent calls, they quickly doubled to over 6,000 concurrent calls into those call centers. So that team is hand managing that and constantly focused on it. So you spoke of some increase in volume. That's a lot, doubling the traffic, when we're probably seeing that across all of our segments of business. So one other question for you. I mentioned it earlier, how we have been repositioning resources to handle our customer needs. I believe that affects your organization a lot because having both hosted services and premise-based services, how have you been able to quickly redeploy your resources to make sure we're meeting our customers' demands? Yeah, great question. So what we've seen is again, with that crawl, walk, run, we see
a scramble in our professional services engagement where organizations did not have expressways or internet gateways to handle remote and mobile phones. We've seen a scramble to go out and do the PS to help those guys get those services turned up. We've been able to borrow a lot of those resources from our hosted environments, where in our hosted environments, much of that was already turned up. There might have been provisioning of some users, but the infrastructure was already there. So it was a very short putt for our hosted customers. And that has allowed us to borrow from our hosted team and focus on the PS engagements, as well as some of the increase in the operational support that's been out there.
Awesome. Thank you. Next, John Lloyd, Director of Cloud Networking. John, same segment. Please share, what's working well, what we've learned, and what issues we've solved for our customers.
Sure. I think the first thing, when we start talking about work from home is that there's a difference between VPN and extending the network. And what I mean by that is we see it when you talk about a voice application, download this application, it runs on your PC or on your cell phone, or maybe you took a phone home in the voice world, and away you go. In our world, if we do VPN, let's say an AnyConnect type, right, a client-based, I have limitations on the back end. I have limitations of either a hardware or licensing, or really what we've seen is the limitation of our end user. When we start looking at a client-based VPN, all of that traffic comes back to my data center. Even if the application doesn't live there, one of the applications we've seen organizations keep in the data center, even as they've shifted to the cloud, is the firewall. It is that security ingress-egress point. And so a home user, I've downloaded my VPN client, and I'm bringing that traffic all the way back into my data center using bandwidth, hitting my VPN concentrator that I've maybe had enough licensing for, maybe had to scale up, maybe had enough hardware for, maybe had to scale up if I could. And then I go back out just to go to a cloud-based application like a Salesforce or Office 365. And so what we've seen is that is crippling customers' bandwidth. It's crippling data centers. The solution to that, you can do split tunneling, but when we start talking about split tunneling, which is the concept of even though you're running a VPN, it makes your device look like two different systems. And so depending on the application you're trying to go to. That way, if you're going to 365 or a trusted application, or let's be honest, we're in a work from home environment, maybe our employees are utilizing more bandwidth with things like iHeartRadio or streaming apps in the background throughout their workday. And we certainly want to support whatever kind of mental health distractions we can provide to our employees. But when all of that's coming back to the data center, it becomes an issue. To do a split tunnel, it's pretty complex, routing configuration on a Windows 10 machine, for example, to create different route statements of where to direct traffic. And so we've seen a large take on what I consider extending the network. These are SD-WAN appliances. These are small business or actually what we would call teleworker appliances that are designed to be cost-effective ways to deploy hardware into the employee's network that can come with a simple set of instructions, 3 steps. They plug it into power, they plug it into the back of their internet modem, and they plug their PC into it. And some of them, depending on what we're trying to solve, even have power over Ethernet ports. So if they did take a phone home from Chris's platform, we can quickly transform and set up their home office to function and act just like they were at their office. But if they want to have other devices in the network, or if they're looking for that split tunneling, it can be done automatically. We can send traffic back to the data center only when it has to and alleviate some of that stress. Another thing that we've seen is the first rush was how do we deliver home networks? How do we take our office for users who aren't used to working at home and quickly deliver that without time to buy hardware or stand things up? The second wave really started in week 2, and that was the idea of pop-up networks. This is mostly concentrated to healthcare, but it's the idea that we may not be sitting in a physical building. How do we continue to take the needed applications? When you think about standing up a testing clinic, or you think about standing up a remote clinic, you need the access to all of the same applications as you would a full hospital. We need voice there. We need the ability to get back to applications like Epic or Cerner. We need the ability to print You walk in and you get the wristband with your name on it as a patient. That's a printer that's coming back to the network. So the idea of how do we deliver a network in a box? It's similar to extending the home network, but there's a lot more that goes into it. And that's one of the projects that our team has been heads down working on is hospital in a box, complete with a rack with access points and switching and SD-WAN appliances and generators and gas backup. And really that leads into the idea of flexible connectivity, not taking for granted that we're going to be able to have a reliable or some lead time to build out things like GPON networks. And so we've been utilizing LTE, we've been utilizing satellite, we've been able to quickly adapt and spin up networks that otherwise were vacant parking lots a week prior. And so utilizing technology that is cloud connected or software defined, allowing us to build auto networks or auto scale very quickly. And then the last piece, what we're really moving into now in week 3, it's kind of been these phases. Now week 3 is looking at, well, if my only application back in the data center was the firewall, my security stack, or maybe 20% is left in my data center, how do I create a model or a world where that isn't reliant on me and maybe I don't have to send out these appliances for work from home or ask my employee to become a route switch expert and configure split tunneling? And that's really looking at the idea of protecting the perimeter. So rather than protecting as people now realize, we used to think we were protecting the network. Now what we realize is the network is really all around us. And so there's already been a push towards software-defined perimeters, CASBs, SASEs. These are some of the buzzwords that really just means a complete security fabric that lives out in the cloud. And wherever you sit and whatever device you're on, whether it's a bring your own device network, whether it's a PC provided by the company, all of that has to funnel through and connect to that security point before it can go out to applications or go out to the internet. And so that's creating this catch-all net where if I design that and develop that correctly, now it doesn't matter what the transport is, it doesn't matter what the device is, and it doesn't matter where that employee is working from, my office, my home, Starbucks when they reopen, right? We know that we're keeping it protected and safe, and we're not putting that strain on our network. So it's been we're 3 weeks in, and these are the 3 shifts we've seen is quickly, how do I get to home? Secondarily, how do I take the network wherever I need it to be? And now, how do I protect the network wherever it is and wherever the employee is?
Great. Thanks, John. So not only working from home, but extending the network for those businesses that can't work from home because they are essential, such as healthcare organizations, extending the network in a rapid time for them to service the influx of patients or those different individuals that still need assistance in this time. So I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Okay, at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Tony King. Tony, for our Q&A period. Tony, take it over, please.
Thanks, Greg. The first question that we've got here is there have been several stories in the news lately about hackers getting into virtual meetings. Are there any suggestions for ensuring hackers can't get into my meetings? I think probably Chris or Dave would be best suited to address that.
Yeah, I can take a stab at it, Tony. I think there's kind of 2 things that jump out at the top of the head on what folks can do. One of them really is using that personal meeting room less and scheduling unique meeting IDs, unique meetings. I know many have become accustomed, myself included, to just using that personal meeting room because it's easy to remember. It's the same time every week. People just, they can do that without having to put a password in. But that's really where security breaks down is when you start finding those shortcuts, be it for meetings, for sites, for anything else, because it's easy to remember. That's kind of the red flag that it's a security hole. The other thing will probably be for scheduling meetings. The folks that are actually placing the meetings out there, make sure you're using some type of multi-factor auth, 2-factor auth, anything that would, verify that you are who you say you are when you're scheduling that meeting, when you're sending it out, when you're not just somebody tossing a meeting invite out, posing to be so-and-so.
I can add to that too. You know, a little known feature of a WebEx meeting, for example, is the lock feature. So myself as a meeting host, once I see that my participants are in my meeting, I could lock that meeting. That puts somebody that's trying to get into my meeting into a virtual room that will not be admitted unless I let them in. So leveraging both passwords on meeting setup, or if you're still using a personal room that is repetitive, it might not be password protective, leverage that lock function of that meeting room to prevent anybody from the outside coming in and bombarding your meeting. It's another little known secret.
That's great. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Greg. Next question. From the customers you've been dealing with that have adapted to work from home, what did they do differently than customers who are struggling? Steve, do you think you could field that question for us?
Sure. I guess the ones who have been, some of this comes down to the function of the business itself. Some businesses are just easier to do from home than others. But from a technology perspective, it comes back to something that that John said earlier, and that is we've seen customers who have made investments earlier on to change to a software-defined world, where they've taken and software-defined their network, they've software-defined their infrastructure or their security, have had a much easier time being able to adapt because they have the flexibility to now reprogram the raw materials within their IT infrastructure to be directed towards this work from home. Customers who have struggled tend to be ones who have a very traditional network and infrastructure view of the world. John had talked about the physical firewalls and making sure all traffic came back to a physical location. And those are the ones that have struggled the most. So the ones who have looked forward a bit and prior to this had leaned towards this software-defined model have had a much easier time being able to adapt. And from a consulting world, we often tell our customers that when you're building, you need to start building with Play-Doh instead of concrete, because once it's set, you can't change it, and it's very, very difficult to adapt to these shocks to the system.
Thanks, Steve. We've got a few questions about the remote model and potentially how things will permanently be changed as a result of this. Let's maybe start with the telephony and collaboration aspect. Now that we've done this remote model, what things worked well that we should keep on when we actually go back into a traditional office environment? Dave, if you wouldn't mind starting to field that question.
Certainly. So I think it's a great question, right? It's what quite often what happens in business is we talk about things that probably could work, but there are some hurdles, and we never get around those hurdles. Again, remote agents is one of those things. Well, it would be nice if we could save some brick and mortar, but we don't know if we'll be able to keep folks engaged or if it'll be too difficult to manage. And when we hit a crisis like this, it forces us to go to that model whether we're ready or not. I believe that a lot of times getting over a threshold like that, when we go back, we find that we've stretched. We've stretched our abilities, and now we see that we can rely on some of the technologies that we were hesitant or simply couldn't get over the first few hurdles to really try and see what the limitations were. So I believe that when we are using this remote model, I think what we are going to see is that we're getting over those first hurdles. We're finding that we can manage it. We'll probably find some things that we didn't know. We didn't realize that we would have to work harder to help our employees stay connected and stay communicative and keep the morale up, that sort of thing in a remote model. So I think when we go back, what we will see is that all of our organizations have stretched in what they understand can work from a remote model, and we'll probably keep a lot of that remote work model as a part of our continued business plan.
And just to add to that, I would say one of the things that I've seen grow a lot is the use of video for smaller meetings and so forth. Previously we would have limited use of video, but now people are getting comfortable with the concept of just using their video as a chat, as part of their meeting experience. And that's something that I think will continue once we're past this and life goes back to the new normal, is that the concept of the video call will become more and more mainstream, and less of an anomaly.
I agree with you there, Steve. I consider myself a power user. So my work from home environment consists of a personal telepresence endpoint. For those that might know what a DX80 is, I've got that sitting on my desk that's cloud registered. So, for smaller meetings, I'm trying to use video to have that personal touch with maybe my team members, my customers. This device has been a blessing for me to still connect, even from my home office. So I agree with you.
Thanks, guys. Kind of but more network oriented, how do you think network needs will be permanently changed as a result of this? John, do you think you could field that question?
Yeah, I think so. I kind of, as I was talking to the extend from home, we talked about some of the bandwidth piece, and really these are some of the things. What are we doing right now? I think there's going to be, whenever life does return to normal, one, I think you're going to see a big reliance on telco and service provider. Not that there already wasn't. In a lot of ways, you kind of have that trusted advisor that provides, whether it's telephony or whether it's managed services. I think one of the things we've learned, exactly what we're doing here on the call today, that is we've learned and adapt quickly. A lot of what we're doing in the healthcare space came out of one specific healthcare customer that we worked with. They had a very unique need. We solved that very unique need and then realized that unique need wasn't unique to them. That was the whole industry right now. And so I think we bring scale and expertise that customers will be able to leverage. The scale being a big component. I know my peers on the voice side with Chris and Dave and the work they've done to scale our voice network and prepare for this influx in call centers, prepare for this influx in WebEx meetings and minutes. So that carrier scale is something that comes at a huge cost benefit, as well as the expertise of those guys to our end customers. And then I think for those that do stay in the network, right, so whether I go to a telco for services, whether I push my final remaining applications to a cloud or SaaS model, I know everyone's already been going there for a few years. Those that remain in the network, I think that one of the things I took away from this is virtualization is going to become a huge priority. We've had a lot of enterprise customers we've helped over the last 2 weeks because their data centers were built out, and Steve mentioned that software defined, and looking at virtualization. They had the cores, they had the compute, and so we were able to put virtual applications. We had one customer that had no VPN infrastructure, but they had a virtual infrastructure, and we were able to put in a virtual Cisco ASA 5530, get it licensed with some great promos they had going on, and they literally went from 0 work from home employees to 600 work from home employees, and we were able to do that in a matter of hours because of virtualization. That will also lead into automation. I know Chris Pope called out the retail needs and how those have been obviously very dynamic right now, but also making a change one time rather than 1,000 times to apply across the board. And we're doing the same thing in the networking world. We have a lot of changes that are needing to be made, whitelists added, people are adopting and adapting differently. And when you're a retail organization with 3,000 locations, to try to go and do that at every site is obviously time consuming and not realistic. So I think you're going to see a big influx on virtualization and then automation. How do I run Python scripts against an API? How do I build Ansible playbooks to be able to configure and adapt faster? I think those are going to be really the big thing is if I haven't moved to the cloud, I'm going to finally consider it, and you're going to see those late adopters. For those who don't, they're going to build everything out virtualized, allowing them to scale. And then for organizations that don't have a blank check to write, they're going to realize that, well, telcos and service providers, these folks already have scaled. And so rather than me building an infrastructure, nobody thought about their 100% of their workforce going home for 2 months. So nobody bought hardware and bought licensing to that scale. You buy 20, 30, 40% over what you need. And so I think there's going to be a big reliance on how telcos can help for whatever that next unprepared phase is.
a great answer, John. I appreciate it. I think I'm going to push one of these questions about biggest lessons learned maybe till last. Question for you, Greg. What are the biggest differences between business-oriented tools like WebEx versus applications like Zoom? And are they really worth the added investment?
Was that to me, Tony? I cut out a little bit.
Sorry, Greg.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
What are the biggest differences between business-oriented tools like WebEx versus applications like Zoom? And are they worth the added investment?
Yes, I would say they're definitely worth the added investment. We made a strategic decision as a service provider several years ago to not build out what was telepresence as a service back in the day, but we leverage WebEx as our cloud connected meetings functionality. So the bridging is done all out in the cloud. We didn't have to invest, nor do customers have to invest in the old large-scale telepresence infrastructures that it used to take to carry on video meetings. You know, Zoom and WebEx are competitors. They're both cloud-based meetings. You know, I believe that Cisco has a better portfolio when it comes to the total collaborative story. When it comes to calling, meetings, messaging, video endpoints, you know, Cisco is just more of a holistic solution, where Zoom chooses to go to the market as a cloud provider that partners with other manufacturers such as Polycom and Logitech and Microsoft to build out their rooms. So to each their own. You know, we have customers that love Zoom, we have customers that love WebEx, but essentially they're the same type of service that leverage the cloud to bridge voice, video, and web users together to collaborate.
So Steve Harris, I'm going to jump in on that one as well, Greg, if you don't mind.
Not at all. Go ahead.
The difference, there are also some fundamental architectural differences between the platforms, mainly in the security space. And this is something that we consult with clients on fairly regularly. And that is the architecture of WebEx is, as you said, cloud-based, and it is doing most of your processing work in the cloud in a secured environment. Zoom relies on the endpoint to do a lot of the processing. I won't get into the security details of that, but it does mean that when you are implementing a Zoom-based infrastructure, you are creating a whole series of additional security attack vectors that have to be addressed. If done properly, it can be fine, but the difference in pricing is more than compensated for by the increase in security components you have to deal with when you do it using a Zoom platform. They're just a different architecture for how they manage the collaboration tools and what they install on your computer as the local client.
Thanks, Greg and Steve. Next question, maybe for Chris, planning for the future. How easy will the migration back to the office be now that we've enabled all this work from home technology? How many workforces will adopt a more permanent blend of in-office versus remote work? And how do we continue to enable and transform, not maybe only as our personal businesses, but also as a society?
Yeah, okay. A lot in that one, but let's start at the top of it. You know, the migration back to the office environment, it'll likely, from a technology perspective, it'll be an easy one, especially with our hosted UC solution. The users that have been using that, they, you know, their work from home, their remote capabilities that were enabled on them are just a toggle. They, you know, and for some of them, they work in line specifically. So for all that, you know, for all they know, they can walk back into the office tomorrow and their phones will still be ringing on the desks. They'll be able to get right back at it, you know, right back in those face-to-face meetings in the huddle rooms, using the conference phones. All of it's, you know, it's still there. Let me see, what was the other piece of that? You know, who will adopt the more permanent one, I think is what you said. You know, that's really a good question. You know, when I was talking earlier, I think a part of it was some people were, you know, afraid to step out of that comfort zone of, you know, and they need to see their employees in person. That I know some people have referred to it as line of sight phenomena, and I really think that some habits are going to form if they haven't already over the last few weeks, and some businesses will realize, the traditional yearly planning around expense and capital and this and that, may give some of those businesses the ability to shed costs in other areas by, having some employees work remotely, have, things like that. So we'll see if that comes to pass. It may not, depending on how long we're all in this together here. And then, of course, the environment they're in right now, utilizing, say, the UC1 application or WebEx Teams, those applications, the underlying technology that we're running in our data centers and in the cloud, those are constantly being upgraded. Folks are still, innovating, developing new patches, new features, and they'll naturally be rolled out through an app update through the Android App Store or the iPhone App Store. People, they'll get them. It'll be up to us to inform them that, hey, there's a new feature that just got rolled out and it's included with what you already have. So, and then of course what we do the best here, and that's really consulting with people and finding out what's working for them while they're out there having a lot of those kind of post-pandemic conversations of, what worked well for you guys, what did you learn yourselves, and then maybe we can redesign that office environment once they move back to be more effective. All of those are kind of things that we're trying to plan for now that we're starting to see the new trends on the capacity side from the network. It's how can we position these products and get ready for going back to normal.
Chris, if I could add to that, and just a real basic one is, as we've deployed these enterprise systems, there is always a tendency to want a hard phone. Folks are very hesitant to replace it with a soft phone. So even at a basic level, I think, again, being forced to do it, I bet a lot of folks come in and come back and are more comfortable with their soft phone, and we'll see more organizations actually do a replacement of hard phones with soft phones, and we'll see users be more comfortable with that decision.
Thanks, guys. I think I'm going to combine a couple of questions here and then pose it to each of the panelists, starting with you, John. What are the biggest lessons learned, let's say from this or over the last few weeks? And if you could give one piece of advice to a client or a friend or a partner right now to prepare if there's another round or what's next or the next big system shock.
I think so. The biggest lesson I've learned is that we have to look at each organization's. In the past, I guess let me phrase it this way. In the past, we tried to design industry best practice or industry standards and apply them across the board and meet 80% of the need, 90% of the need, and then just tweak, right? So we would call it kind of a pre-built solution in a box that can go and be applied with a few wrench turns. The biggest lesson I've learned is that is not really possible in this current environment. With your work from home, each employee's got different needs. The number of employees changes the needs. Who their local internet service providers are changes the needs. Where your applications live. So I think that the first lesson learned or biggest lesson learned is please reach out to your trusted IT advisor. Hopefully that's somebody within our organization. If you're on this for educational purposes and we aren't that person, you have somebody else, please reach out to them. I think what we hope to accomplish with these webinars, I think I've gotten an email from every single IT company in the world to tell me about some promo they're running or how their product, can help me in this time. None of them actually understand what the help is that I need. So my lesson learned is let's have a conversation. Let's understand what your unique challenges are and what subset of technology, business practices, buying models need to be built together and how quickly can they be built together. We don't want to start looking at a 9-month plan because I think we're all in the hopes of, we'll get back to work sooner than that. So that'd be the biggest lesson learned and probably the biggest advice, right? Is just lean on your trusted advisors more than on marketing collateral or sales efforts right now. and be human. I think I've been on the phone nonstop. I joked I charge my Bluetooth 3 times a day. I've been on the phone nonstop for 3 weeks, and my wife's at home. My kids are at home. I think a large amount of our customers over the last 3 weeks have had a video call with my son. That, to me, has actually been really cool, and the folks on the other side as well. This has been a very humanizing experience. For once, there's no experts on either side. We're all going through the same human emotion together. So that's been a cool takeaway, and the best advice I can give is lean into that and continue to trust your fellow human and ask for advice, and let's design something together.
Thanks, John. Dave, what are your biggest lessons learned, and what if any, advice could you provide?
Sure. Thanks, Tony. So not to simply echo John's, but I'll add to it. What has been most effective have been those conversations with our customers of what they're actually trying to accomplish. Early on, many of our customers were just turning in tickets to turn on features and not really talking through what those features were going to do or not do, or what impact they would have. For instance, lots of organizations simply put in tickets to call forward their phones to their mobiles, not understanding that would have an impact on their voicemail, on their compliancy for voicemail, on 911 callback. So sitting down with those customers, helping them understand the difference between call forward versus single number reach or the find me, follow me, versus the use of a soft phone, and what, if any or all of those features were already available to them. Having those conversations made tremendous differences in how we handled, again, our large government, healthcare, and education providers, and I believe very much helped them be more effective in this remote model. And instead of band-aiding, we help them come up with a solution that can get them through the long term. So it's a little bit of an echo of John, but having those conversations, understanding the features and the opportunities and the pros and cons of each of those can help you put a more effective solution together.
Thanks, Dave. Steve, biggest lesson learned? Any advice?
So I'm going to take this from a bit of a Canadian context. Canada tends to lag behind the U.S. with regard to adoption from a cloud perspective. And so one of the big takeaways from here is that the customers we've been dealing with that have best adapted, I talked about software defined and being flexible, and a lot of that is driven from cloud adoption. So my biggest takeaway is, we need to accelerate within the Canadian context the adoption of cloud services, everything from Office 365 to infrastructure and platform and software as a service models. And so my advice to anyone from that Canadian context is, if you haven't got your cloud plan in place, then your next big step needs to be, how am I going to get to cloud? How am I going to do it and make that migration? Because it's one of the big things that has helped in this situation more than anything else, is the fact that now I can access all of these services, from the cloud without having to expand my own infrastructure. So that would be the biggest one from a Canadian perspective, I think.
Thanks, Steve. Chris, biggest lessons learned? Any advice?
Sure thing. I think our biggest lesson learned was we really had to develop the skin of a pineapple. And what I mean by that is we had to avoid all the noise, all the everyone coming to us and saying, hey, what can we do for this? What can we do for that? And focus on what's core and important to the business. And I use the word core, and that's specifically the network health as a whole from an engineering perspective. So I translate that to the customer's businesses is what is the most important to them when it comes to their communication needs. Is it the fact that they need their phones to keep ringing? Is it the fact that their network needs to now expand for e-commerce or whatever it might be and use that? So, my advice would be to focus, to limit the noise, and do what the company does best.
Great. Thanks, team. We're at time. It's 10 a.m. I'd like to wrap it up. And pineapple, Chris, I have no idea where pineapple came. But anyway, thank you for joining us. I hope this was informative. If you would like to continue on conversation with us, reach out to your OnX or CBTS contact. This recording will be available. If you'd like to come back and visit it or forward it to a colleague, feel free to do that. Also, lastly, stay healthy. Everybody do your part to stay healthy, and we'll get through this together. Thank you very much.